In the quiet town of Laramie, Wyoming, 19-year-old college sophomore Megan Kessler vanished after making a late-night stop at a rural gas station in 2005. For years, her disappearance baffled police students and her family. Then, during a routine inspection at a construction site in 2022, workers uncovered a rusted car entombed beneath a concrete foundation and inside a truth colder than the cement itself. The gas station was the only one open on the stretch of Highway 287 between Rawlins and Laramie that late at night. It stood alone like a flickering lighthouse in a sea of prairie darkness, 2 pumps, a buzzing sign, and a single overhead bulb that cast long shadows on the cracked concrete. Megan Kessler pulled in just after midnight. Her battered blue Saturn sedan rolled to a stop beside Pump 2, her headlights cutting into the black Wyoming sky. She had been driving back from visiting her cousin in Fort Collins. Classes resumed the next day at the University of Wyoming, and she didn't want to be late for her Monday chemistry lab. Megan had called her roommate around 10:30 p.m., saying she was gassing up before the final leg of the trip. She sounded tired, but upbeat, saying the stars were bright enough to feel like she was floating through space. It was the last anyone ever heard from her. The clerk that night, a man named Brian Halter, remembered Megan. He'd later tell police that she came in wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, and flip-flops despite the autumn chill. She bought a Gatorade, a bag of sunflower seeds, and a single pack of gum. Paid in cash. Smiled, thanked him, and left. Surveillance footage confirmed the transaction. Then nothing. No one saw her pull out. No one reported her car on the road. When her roommate called her the next morning and got no response, it set off a slow chain reaction calls to her parents in Casper, a report to campus security, and then eventually a statewide alert. The search began fast but ended faster. State troopers swept the highway corridor by helicopter and car, but there was no sign of tire tracks veering off the road, no debris, no broken fences. Megan's car didn't ping any traffic cameras or license plate readers. Her phone had last pinged a rural tower near the gas station, and then radio silence. Everyone had a theory. Some thought she'd crashed in a remote ravine and died instantly. Others whispered about human trafficking rings snatching young women from gas stations. But most people just assumed she'd run off. But Megan Kessler wasn't the type to vanish. Her professors described her as focused and sharp, a biology major with a 3.8 GPA and a clear plan med school, then pediatrics. Her parents described her as stubbornly responsible, the kind of girl who'd text if she was 5 minutes late. Her roommate said Megan was almost boring in how reliable she was. Investigators questioned friends, classmates, her ex-boyfriend. They found nothing. No signs of depression, no history of erratic behavior, no reason to believe she'd planned to disappear. The gas station footage became the centerpiece of the investigation. Grainy video showed her walking in at 12:03 a.m., then exiting at 12:08. But the camera pointing toward the pumps where her car sat had malfunctioned. Static. The old analog system hadn't been serviced in years, and the store owner admitted they only fixed what absolutely broke. "You get what you pay for," he said to reporters with a shrug. Investigators canvassed nearby truckers and travelers. No one remembered seeing Megan's car on the highway. No vehicle matching her description was reported stolen or spotted at any major crossing. With no crime scene, no physical evidence, and no suspects, the case went stale within months. But for Megan's family, time didn't move forward, it just slowed down. Her mother, Diane, would sit for hours at the kitchen table flipping through Megan's photo albums, as if she might catch a clue in the tilt of a smile. Her father, Warren, barely spoke to the media. He kept driving the route she'd taken that night, pulling over at every turnout, every ditch, scanning the horizon with binoculars like he was looking for a deer. He never found anything. In 2007, 2 years after she vanished, Megan's family erected a billboard along I-80, a photo of her smiling on the quad. Hair swept up in a ponytail, the words "still missing" in bold yellow above her name. Beneath it, a line that broke hearts. Last seen getting gas. Where did she go? People talked for a while, but eventually the whispers faded. New cases took the spotlight. New tragedies filled the news cycles. Megan's disappearance became a footnote in Wyoming's long ledger of unsolved mysteries until 2022, when a road crew outside Cheyenne was tearing up an old parking lot to prep for a new warehouse foundation. The excavator struck something hard beneath 3 feet of poured concrete. It wasn't a pipe. It was a car roof. And inside, under 17 years of silence, lay the final chapter Megan Kessler had never gotten to write. The news reached Diane and Warren Kessler on a rainy Tuesday morning. A detective from the Cheyenne Police Department called just after 9:00 a.m., his voice flat with caution but weighted with finality. "We believe we found Megan's vehicle." Diane dropped her coffee mug. It shattered, but she didn't react. Warren simply asked one question. "Is she in it?" There was a long pause. "Then yes, sir. We believe so." The discovery made headlines across the state within hours. Car found in cement. May solve 2005 college disappearance read the front page of the Casper Star-Tribune. In Cheyenne, TV reporters gathered at the construction site on the east side of town, where the shell of a long-abandoned warehouse was being demolished for new commercial space. Yellow police tape flapped in the wind around a square excavation pit roughly 20 feet across. The roof of a blue Saturn sedan protruded from the cracked concrete like the fossil of a forgotten creature. By evening, the vehicle had been carefully removed and transported to a forensics facility under state police jurisdiction. The car was heavily rusted, its tires flattened, and the interior sealed in by years of pressure and cement residue. But the license plate was intact. WY25439. Megan's plate. Inside the vehicle, forensics confirmed the presence of skeletal remains in the driver's seat. A gray hoodie still clung to the bones. A single flip-flop lay in the passenger footwell. The forensics team also retrieved a partially intact student ID tucked inside a degraded wallet under the seat. The name on the card, Kessler Megan A. Diane and Warren were asked to come to Cheyenne the next day to give a formal identification. But there was nothing to see, not really. No viewing, no body. Just paperwork and the echo of the worst possible truth. For the Kesslers, it was a strange kind of closure, like stepping into a room after a fire and finding the ash still warm. 17 years of hoping, grieving, wondering. And suddenly all of it had hardened like the cement that had buried her. The questions returned faster than the grief. How did her car end up under 3 feet of concrete in an industrial park 60 miles from where she was last seen? Who had access to the site in 2005? Why did no one see the poor report the vehicle or notice the disruption? The original case, filed under Albany County jurisdiction, was quickly transferred to a joint task force, including Laramie PD, Cheyenne PD, and the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. The DA's office began reviewing the original 2005 investigation. Detectives reopened every lead phone call and interview. Megan's case file was thick but shallow, full of missing pieces and faded notes. At home in Casper, Warren sat on the porch with a manila envelope full of old flyers. He ran his fingers across the ink of Megan's name. "I always thought she might still be alive," he told a local reporter. "Even when people stopped asking. There's always that sliver, until someone cuts it out of you." Her younger brother Tyler was 12 when Megan vanished. Now 29, he stood beside his parents at a press conference in Laramie 2 days after the car was found. "We're grateful to the workers who uncovered her car," he said. "But make no mistake, this was no accident. Someone buried my sister. That simple statement changed the tone of the case. No longer just a mystery, it was now presumed homicide. In 2005, the warehouse lot had been part of a planned industrial park on the outskirts of Cheyenne. The developer Falcon Ridge Construction had started several projects in that area, but the warehouse was never completed. Work stalled in late 2006 due to zoning issues, and the structure had sat vacant for years, used sporadically for storage before being sold in 2018. Over time, its purpose faded from memory, but permits and plans leave trails. Investigators combed through archived city records, building permits, zoning appeals, and concrete pour invoices. They began to establish a timeline of activity on the site between late 2005 and early 2006. Slowly, they built a list of every crew contractor and foreman who had worked in that window. And one name kept surfacing: Thomas Greer. Greer had been a subcontractor for Falcon Ridge, working as a concrete specialist. He'd been cited twice in 2006 for unauthorized pours and was known for cutting corners. At the time, he'd owned a private cement mixer and often took side jobs under the table. Records indicated he had been the last individual to submit a finished pour receipt for the northern section of the warehouse lot, the exact area where Megan's car had been buried. More troubling still, Greer had no alibi for the weekend Megan disappeared. In 2005, Greer had lived in Laramie. According to DMV records, he owned a green 1992 Ford F-250, the same model described by a witness back in the early days of the investigation. A man had reported seeing a green truck idling at the gas station just after midnight, but his account was dismissed at the time due to lack of corroborating detail. The license plate hadn't been captured. No other sightings were made. Now, nearly 2 decades later, the same green truck sat rusting in Greer's backyard. He still lived in Wyoming, just 2 towns over. Police knocked on his door 3 days after the discovery. Greer was cooperative if nervous, said he barely remembered anything from that long ago, denied knowing Megan Kessler, claimed he'd left the construction business in 2010. When asked if he'd ever been to the Laramie gas station, he shrugged. Could have been. But I don't remember every damn gas stop I ever made. Investigators took a sample of his DNA and impounded the truck for processing. But it was his reaction when asked about the cement orders that raised eyebrows. "You think I buried a damn car in concrete," he said. "What kind of lunatic does that?" The room went quiet. No one had mentioned how the car was found. Sheriff Neil Harmon was the one who couldn't let it go. He hadn't been assigned to the original 2005 case. Back then, he was still a patrol deputy fresh out of the academy. But he remembered the day Megan's disappearance swept through Laramie like a cold front. The flyers, the dorm meetings, the press circling like vultures outside the campus library. It haunted him not because he knew Megan personally, but because the lack of resolution never sat right. Something about it felt unnatural. A girl like Megan didn't just vanish on a highway, not without someone noticing. So when he rose to sheriff in 2009, he made a quiet promise to himself. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, he pulled the file. By 2010, that obsession turned productive. That summer, Harmon received an anonymous letter. No return address. Inside was a single line written in blocky, all-capital letters. The missing footage from the pump camera, you never asked why it wasn't there. At first, he thought it was a prank. But then he reviewed the original evidence logs. The interior security tape had been logged, copied, and reviewed. The external camera, the one pointed at the pumps, had been marked as malfunctioning. The system had supposedly been down that night, but no technician's report existed. No work order. No documentation of a service call before or after. Harmon visited the gas station now under new ownership. The layout hadn't changed much. He found the junction box for the old security system, its wires clipped and weather-worn. Inside, the serial numbers were still legible. He traced them back to the manufacturer, and then with help from a friend at the State Tech Division, traced the maintenance records. That's when it got strange. The camera system had last been serviced just 3 weeks before Megan's disappearance. A technician had signed off on full functionality. There had been no known issues. That same technician later confirmed under questioning that the pump camera had been operational at the time. So why did the owner claim it had failed? The owner, a man named Larry Nesbitt, had retired in 2008 and moved to Arizona. Harmon tracked him down and posed his question directly. Nesbitt squinted into the sun for a long while before answering. "I didn't say it failed," he said. "I said the tape was missing. You all just assumed it didn't record." Harmon blinked. "You're telling me that tape disappeared?" Nesbitt nodded. "After that night, I checked the system like always. Interior tape was there. Pump tape was gone. Thought maybe someone rewound the wrong one. That revelation shifted everything. Someone had physically removed the tape." Harmon reopened the case officially. He submitted requests to re-interview all employees who had access to the security system. Halter, the clerk on duty that night, had since moved to Denver and worked in IT. Harmon met him at a diner just off I-25. "I remember her," Halter said immediately. "The girl in the hoodie. Polite. Looked tired." When asked about the missing footage, Halter paused. "I didn't remove it if that's what you're thinking," he said. "But I always thought it was weird how the owner brushed it off. Like it was no big deal. Back then, I was too young to push back. Did anyone else go near the system that night?" Halter thought for a long moment. "There was this guy. Came in after her. Big dude, maybe late 30s. Had a scratchy beard, wore a jacket with paint or plaster on it. He kept asking me weird questions about the area. Where the next rest stop was. Where the cameras pointed. Did he buy anything? A Red Bull, I think. Paid cash. But I remember one thing: when he turned to leave, he glanced back at Megan's car like he recognized it." Harmon's pulse ticked up. "Did he say anything about her?" "No," Halter said. "But the way he looked, it wasn't casual. It was like he was checking something off in his mind." That detail stuck with Harmon for weeks. He cross-referenced the gas station's receipts from that night, hoping to match the Red Bull purchase with a timestamp. It matched 12:11 a.m., just minutes after Megan left. But there was no name, no card swipe. Just a line on a register tape. Still, Harmon now had a description of a man possibly watching Megan's car, and a missing camera tape someone had deliberately removed. Then came another clue. While going through archived call logs, Harmon found a dispatch report from a highway patrol officer filed 2 hours after Megan vanished. A semi-truck driver had reported a blue car pulled onto a service road outside Cheyenne, barely visible from the highway. The report had been dismissed because the officer drove out and found nothing when he arrived. But the timestamp mattered: 2:10 a.m. And the road, it fed directly into the industrial zone where Megan's car was ultimately found. Had someone moved her vehicle that quickly? If Megan had pulled off voluntarily, she would have called someone. If she'd broken down, she'd have left the car, walked to the road, signaled for help. But no footprints had ever been found. No one had seen her walking, unless she hadn't been the one driving at that point. Harmon added a name to the bottom of his whiteboard in red ink: Thomas Greer. He didn't know how yet, but something about that name, that truck, and that missing tape pulled at the threads that had unraveled Megan's life. It would take over a decade for the next piece to surface, but by then it would be buried in 3 feet of silence. The autumn wind blew dust through the half-demolished construction lot in Cheyenne, swirling around the hole where Megan's car had been entombed for nearly 17 years. The excavator had been hauled away, but a temporary fence still ringed the site, guarded by local police and watched by reporters with long lenses and cold coffee. The blue Saturn had become a relic, an unwilling time capsule holding answers that law enforcement could finally start to uncover. Back at the state forensics lab, technicians worked around the clock. The car was corroded, its paint faded, and metal warped from the pressure of poured concrete. But the structure of the vehicle had held, and so had many of its secrets. Inside, they found Megan's backpack, wedged beneath the passenger seat. Water damage had ruined most of the contents. Spiral-bound notebooks melted into pulp pens, swollen and cracked. But in a side pocket sealed in a cheap plastic sandwich bag, her wallet had survived. Her driver's license, student ID, and a folded note with a handwritten grocery list were all legible, even more telling her phone. It was a relic of the mid-2000s, a silver Nokia flip phone battery expanded and casing warped, but data still partially retrievable with enough care. Technicians used heat-controlled drying chambers and forensic software to salvage what they could. Among the recovered fragments, one unsent text. Drafted at 12:09 a.m. There's a guy watching me. Creepy. At the pump. Green truck. The timestamp aligned perfectly with what clerk Brian Halter had told Harmon. And it gave investigators the first hard confirmation that Megan had noticed the man in the green truck, likely before she even left the gas station lot. Sheriff Harmon shared the text with the task force and cross-referenced the vehicle again. The green Ford F-250 registered to Thomas Greer in 2005 had received multiple citations between 2003 and 2007, mostly for improper parking at job sites and failing to maintain safety lights. Nothing criminal, but enough to document his presence at multiple construction zones. Greer's name also appeared on a list of contractors Falcon Ridge used during its 2005 expansion into Cheyenne. Several invoices bore his signature. One stood out, a concrete delivery dated October 3, 2005, one day after Megan disappeared. That pour was listed as emergency fill work on the northeast section of the site, and it was made without a corresponding inspection report. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Greer's property. On a cold Saturday morning, officers descended on his ranch-style home outside Wheatland, a 2-hour drive from the burial site. They combed through his tool shed, workshop, and garage. In a dusty cabinet behind a stack of tarps, they found a locked metal box. Inside, VHS tapes. Most were unmarked. One was labeled in red marker 287 Night. The task force brought the tapes back for digital conversion. When Harmon played the one labeled 287 Night, he felt a chill race down his spine. It was black and white, dated October 2, 2005. The timestamp ran from 12:06 to 12:20 a.m. It was security footage, the missing pump camera feed. The image was grainy. The angle tilted slightly to the left, but the scene was unmistakable. Megan's Saturn pulled up to the pump. A young woman exited the car, swiped her card, and began fueling. From the right side of the frame, a green truck slowly entered the lot and parked at the far pump. A large man in a bulky jacket exited, pausing near his passenger door. He turned, watching Megan with a strange stillness. She glanced at him once and quickly looked away. She replaced the nozzle, closed her cap, and opened her door. The man stepped forward. In a flash of motion, he was at her driver's side window, leaning in. The video had no audio, but his posture was aggressive. Megan tried to pull the door closed, but he pushed it open farther. Suddenly, she darted backward, fumbling with her keys. He reached into his coat and the tape cut. Just stopped. No trailing static, just a sharp manual cut. Greer had removed the tape. He'd copied it. And he'd kept it. Why, that answer wasn't clear. But the implication was horrifying. He hadn't just buried her, he'd watched himself do it over and over. Back at the lab, analysts also found traces of cement dust in Megan's car, embedded in the fibers of her hoodie and the dashboard. It matched the composition of the mix used at the warehouse site. Another lead emerged when combing through Falcon Ridge's old employee logs. Greer had subcontracted 2 workers that fall day laborers paid in cash. One of them was dead. The other, Ray DeLuna, was alive and living in Greeley, Colorado. Detectives visited him at a flophouse motel where he worked odd jobs and lived paycheck to paycheck. At first, he denied knowing anything, said he barely remembered that fall. But when shown still images from the recovered tape, his demeanor shifted. He went quiet, then whispered, "She screamed." "What do you mean?" Harmon asked. "That girl." He told me she was drunk, that she needed a place to sleep it off. I didn't ask questions. He had the keys to the site. We pulled in through the back lot. He said we were going to stash her car, scare her a bit. And what happened? DeLuna shook his head. He changed. Real fast. Went cold. Told me to help him build a box around the car. I asked why, and he just looked at me and said, "You already did it. Might as well finish it." "Did you see her in the car?" DeLuna wiped his face with trembling hands. She wasn't moving. I don't know if she was alive, but she was there. They arrested Thomas Greer the next morning. Greer didn't answer the door when they arrived. It was early, just after dawn, and the sky over Wheatland was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of snow. Officers surrounded the modest one-story home as Sheriff Harmon knocked twice, then announced the warrant. When no response came, they breached the door. Greer was in the kitchen, sitting at the table in a stained thermal shirt and flannel pajama pants, a cigarette smoldering in his hand. He didn't resist. He didn't even seem surprised. "You've got no idea what you're doing," he muttered as they cuffed him. No idea what really happened. He said nothing else on the drive to Cheyenne. At the station, Greer was booked on suspicion of homicide, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. The recovered VHS tape, the poor logs, and the eyewitness statement from Ray DeLuna gave the DA enough confidence to pursue charges. But Harmon wasn't satisfied. Something about Greer's arrest had felt off. Too calm. Too resigned. In the interrogation room, Greer leaned back in the plastic chair, arms crossed. His eyes darted to the camera in the ceiling corner. "You think you've solved this," he said. "But you're chasing the wrong ghost." "Then help us understand," Harmon said. "Tell us what happened to Megan." Greer stared at him for a long time, then gave a slight shrug. "She got in my truck." "That part's true." "Why?" "She waved me down. Thought I looked safe, I guess. Said someone had been following her on the highway. That was new." Harmon leaned forward. "You're saying there was someone else?" Greer nodded slowly. "Yeah, black SUV, no plates. She said it followed her for miles." This contradicted everything they knew, but Greer's tone wasn't boastful or manipulative. He seemed genuinely tired. "I told her I'd drive ahead a bit, see if they were still there. Took her phone, said I'd call it in from the road." "You took her phone?" "She handed it to me," Greer insisted. "Didn't want to use it herself. Said the guy might be able to trace it." "Then what?" Greer exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing. "When I came back, she was gone. Just gone. Her car was still there. Door open, purse still inside." Harmon didn't respond immediately. This account didn't match the video. The video showed Greer approaching Megan's window, leaning in aggressively. She didn't wave him down, she was trying to shut the door. But Harmon let him talk. "I panicked," Greer continued. "Thought people would think I did something. So I took the car. I knew the warehouse site was quiet. Poured over it the next morning." "You buried her alive?" Greer stiffened. "I didn't kill her. I swear. She wasn't in that car when I poured." It was a bold claim, and possibly a desperate lie. But Harmon couldn't ignore the way Greer's story curved into something different than expected. If he were just a killer caught red-handed, why not make up a simpler story? Why add unnecessary details? Still, the evidence was damning. The cement pour, the VHS tape, the unsent text, Megan's backpack in the car, her body in the driver's seat. And yet Greer insisted I never touched her. A few days later, Harmon received a call from the digital forensics team. They had recovered more data from Megan's phone, specifically cached location pings and a GPS trail leading up to the gas station. One anomaly stood out. From 11:36 p.m., to 11:58 p.m. Megan had pulled off the highway at a rest stop nearly 30 miles south of Laramie. She sat parked for 22 minutes. Why would she stop there so long? Harmon asked aloud. The rest stop had no services, no vending machines. It was just a loop with a few picnic tables and a single outhouse. Maybe she'd stopped to rest. Or maybe, as Greer claimed, someone had been following her, and she pulled over to see if they would pass. Either way, the break in her travel wasn't part of her original plan. She should have reached the gas station 20 minutes earlier. There was another thing. A red light camera near the rest stop had captured a blurry image of a dark SUV pulling onto the shoulder around the same time. The photo was poor quality, but investigators enhanced the frame and noticed something: the vehicle had no front license plate, and the grille matched the shape of a late-model Chevrolet Suburban. It wasn't proof, but it was a lead. Harmon went back through the old case files again, scanning every call, every tip, every dead end. That's when he found a forgotten report from a woman named Lisa Kenton. She had called 2 days after Megan disappeared to report something strange on the night of October 2nd. She had been driving south on 287 and noticed a blue car pulled off the road with its hazard lights on. Parked behind it was a black SUV, no lights, no plates. She hadn't stopped assuming it was just car trouble. The responding officer had filed the tip as unsubstantiated. No follow-up was made. Harmon tracked Lisa down. She now lived in Oregon but agreed to a phone interview. "I still remember that night," she said. It was cold and windy. "I thought the SUV looked out of place, like it was waiting for what Harmon asked. I don't know. But it didn't look like anyone was helping anyone. It looked tense." The lead deepened the mystery. Was Greer telling some version of the truth? Had someone else interacted with Megan before he arrived? Or was this just a complex, layered lie to cover a more straightforward crime? One thing was certain: the case wasn't closed, and Megan Kessler's final hours were still a mosaic of half-truths, omissions, and shadows. The Cheyenne City Building Department was a bureaucratic afterthought: rows of aging metal file cabinets, a blinking printer no one knew how to fix, and coffee-stained maps taped to the walls. But it was here that the next major break in the case emerged. Harmon had requested full records of all construction permits filed for the Falcon Ridge Industrial Park between August 2005 and March 2006. The city's digital archive only dated back to 2010, so an intern wheeled out 4 cardboard boxes filled with paper applications, inspection reports, and handwritten contractor logs. Most of it was mundane roofing certifications, wiring approvals, and permit extensions. But one file stood out. It was a concrete pour approval dated October 3, 2005, signed off by a junior city inspector named Barry McKnight. The permit authorized a 10x12 concrete slab pour for equipment storage at Lot 17, the exact section of the warehouse foundation where Megan's car had been discovered. But something didn't add up. There were no matching requests for concrete delivery in the adjacent utility records, which typically tracked high-volume material use for taxation and inspection purposes. And McKnight's signature didn't appear on any other permits from that year, only this one. The department had no contact information for McKnight. A staff search turned up nothing. Harmon tracked him down through a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated since 2015. McKnight was living in Spokane, Washington, now working in real estate. Over the phone, Harmon asked about the permit. McKnight sighed. "I remember that site. It was a mess. Do you recall signing that specific permit?" A pause. "No, I don't think I did. You're listed on it. Well, then someone forged my name." The implications sank in. The concrete slab that had buried Megan's car had been illegally approved, slipped through under forged credentials. "Who was the contractor listed?" McKnight asked. "Thomas Greer." Another pause. Then a faint "huh." What Harmon pushed. "I remember him," McKnight said. "He was weird. Always too eager to work alone. Used his own mixer instead of subcontracting. I didn't like the guy. Harmon hung up and drove straight to the Cheyenne permit office, pulling records from Falcon Ridge Construction itself. That's when he noticed another discrepancy. In early October 2005, the developer had filed a hold request for Lot 17 due to a projected utility reroute. That meant no construction, especially not concrete pouring, was authorized for that week. And yet here was a slab poured on October 3rd. Greer had bypassed the system. And with that forgery in place, no city inspectors had ever reviewed the slab. No one had reason to suspect that underneath it lay a car, a girl, and 17 years of silence. Harmon began calling former Falcon Ridge employees. Many were long gone, moved out of state, or retired. But one, Marcia Wells, a former site supervisor, still lived in Cheyenne. She agreed to meet at a local diner. "I remember that slab," she said over a cup of black coffee. Greer poured it on a Sunday, which was already against code. No crew, no foreman, just him and his mixer. Said it was a personal favor for the boss. When I brought it up later, the whole thing got brushed off. By who? Mark Denslow. He was the head project manager. Did he sign off on anything? Nope. But he said to let it go. Said Greer was covering a liability situation. I figured it was something shady, but I had bills to pay. Harmon tracked Denslow next. Now living in Phoenix, he worked in high-end condo developments and had little interest in revisiting 2005. That site was a disaster, he said in a clipped tone. Greer was a wild card. I didn't trust him, but he worked fast. Got things done. Did you know about the slab at Lot 17? I knew about it after the fact, but I assumed it was a misfile. Why tell your supervisor to ignore it? Denslow hesitated. Because Greer told me something that made me think it was safer not to ask questions. What did he say? That someone got hurt. Some college kid had trespassed and there'd been an accident. He said he handled it. That's all I needed to hear to walk away. That admission, an implied cover-up, was enough to bring Denslow in for formal questioning. Under pressure, he admitted that Greer had offered him cash in 2005 to look the other way. He claimed he took the money, but figured it was about zoning issues, not murder. Meanwhile, back at the forensic lab, investigators were uncovering new details from the Saturn. Megan's seatbelt was buckled. Her phone was found in the console. Her purse had been unzipped. But what truly stood out was the driver's side airbag. It had not deployed, which meant the car hadn't been crashed or forced into place. It had likely been driven into the warehouse lot by someone, that someone had the keys. Greer continued to claim that when he returned from calling in the SUV, Megan had already vanished. He said he assumed she'd been picked up hurt or worse, and he panicked. But the details of his story changed slightly each time. He couldn't recall what time he left, couldn't say what road he took, couldn't remember what he did with Megan's phone after the call. DeLuna's statement now appeared more credible. Greer had been at the site with Megan's car. DeLuna said she was inside it, that Greer seemed calm, determined. Investigators confronted Greer again, this time with the forged permit, the forged signature, and the testimony from Denslow and Wells. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. But still he denied killing her. Then who did Harmon ask? You poured cement over a girl you say you didn't kill. You forged permits, destroyed evidence, and let a family suffer for 17 years. Greer's answer chilled the room. There was someone else. I don't know who, but she was scared. That's why she flagged me down. Do you have a name? No, just a voice. She said she'd been followed. She said if anything happened to her, it wouldn't be random. The room fell silent. Another name now hovered in the background, a shadow in the periphery. The black SUV, the untraceable plates. A second player who had never surfaced. Someone Megan feared. The day the crew broke through the slab, they didn't expect to find anything more than buried wiring. It was standard procedure demo, the old concrete prep for new foundations. But when the backhoe hit metal, the operator froze. Rebar, one of the workers guessed. No, the foreman muttered, staring down at the jagged scrap just breaking through the concrete. That's a damn car. They shut everything down immediately and called the police. By the time Sheriff Harmon arrived on site, the crew had already cleared most of the debris around the buried vehicle. The cement had cracked cleanly, like something trying to be found. Only the car's rusted roofline was visible, a faded strip of blue smeared with gray dust. The Saturn's windows were cloudy with time, but not entirely opaque. Flashlights revealed fragments of the interior, the steering wheel, the collapsed front seat, and what looked like a human form slumped to the left. Inside, they found Megan. Her body had shifted during the years of pressure, and decay bones settled into the contours of the seat, her hoodie and jeans still intact in ghostly patches. Her skeletal hand was looped loosely through the steering wheel. The seatbelt remained buckled. The keys were still in the ignition, but nothing had been turned. The ignition had never been switched on. The concrete had likely been poured while she was already inside the car. Forensic pathologists worked carefully to preserve the remains. Bone samples were collected and sent for DNA verification. The autopsy would be complex. 17 years of compression exposure to cement alkalinity and partial mummification all complicated the examination. But one thing was immediately clear. There were no fractures, no signs of trauma, no bullet wounds or stab marks, cause of death undetermined. But the implication was chilling. She hadn't died violently. She may have died slowly. Oxygen deprivation, carbon dioxide poisoning, or exposure trapped inside a vehicle sealed in an airtight tomb of drying cement. The idea sickened the team, and yet there were signs she had been unconscious when the pour occurred. Her seatbelt had no evidence of recent wear tension. The lap belt was slack, suggesting it hadn't been fastened by her hand. Toxicology results were inconclusive due to degradation, but trace elements hinted at sedatives, possibly diazepam or a similar compound. Someone had drugged her. That detail reopened the scope of the case in a grim direction. If Greer had not killed Megan outright, had he drugged her, or had someone else? Investigators revisited Greer's medical records and pharmacy history from 2005. No relevant prescriptions. But then came another strange lead. Among the files recovered from Greer's house was a ledger, an old spiral notebook, where he recorded expenses, side jobs, and construction contacts. One entry dated September 27, 2005 stood out. MB Advanced Cash Blueprints Quiet Site Prep. The name wasn't written in full, just M. Was it Megan? Impossible investigators thought. She didn't know Greer, had never worked in construction, had no reason to exchange money with him. Then Harmon flipped the page. Below the note was a phone number, a landline that after some digging was traced back to a now-defunct law office in Denver. A junior attorney at the time had subleased the space from a retired investigator, an ex-private detective named Mitchell Lang. Lang had worked a series of civil suits and low-level surveillance jobs in the early 2000s, before leaving the field entirely in 2006. One of his clients, the Kessler family, Lang had been hired in late 2005 to conduct an unofficial search for Megan in the days after she vanished. But according to the Kesslers, he'd found nothing and stopped returning calls. So why was his number in Greer's ledger? Harmon tracked him to a small town near Pueblo, Colorado, where Lang now lived alone in a trailer off a dirt road. He was 74, grizzled and slow-moving with a bad limp and worse vision. When Harmon introduced himself and asked about Greer, Lang squinted. "Didn't think I'd ever hear that name again," he muttered. "You worked for the Kesslers after Megan disappeared." "Did you ever find anything?" Lang hesitated. "Some things you find, you don't report. You bury them. Because they lead places no one wants to go." Harmon stared. "Did you speak with Greer?" Lang nodded. "He reached out to me. Said he had info about a missing girl. Said he wanted money to talk. I was desperate. I agreed." "What did he tell you?" Lang swallowed. "That she was alive. That she'd been taken by someone in a black SUV, and that he saw it happen. He said he tried to intervene but got scared. Said he could show me where it happened for a price. Did he? No. He took the cash and vanished. I tried to track him down, but he had a dozen burner numbers. I didn't have the power to chase it any further. When the trail went cold, I told the Kesslers I had nothing. I didn't want to give them false hope. Did you believe him? Lang looked down. Not then. But now. He trailed off. Back in Wyoming, investigators began piecing together the black SUV sightings again. They found more reports, all previously dismissed, that clustered along Highway 287 over a 6-week span in late 2005. Each time the SUV followed women driving alone late at night, never close enough to confirm, never long enough to prove, and then it was gone. Vanished like Megan, but now the timeline sharpened. Megan had reported being followed. Greer had confirmed it. Lang had heard the same story and taken money to stay quiet. Still, it didn't explain the burial. If Greer wasn't the killer, why the cement? And then came the discovery that changed everything. In a corner of the Saturn's trunk, tucked inside a spare tire well, was a crushed roll of duct tape, gray commercial grade, with faint traces of brown hair attached. Megan's hair. She'd been restrained at some point. And no one, not Greer, not Lang, not DeLuna, had mentioned that. The forensic team's report confirmed what investigators had begun to fear. The duct tape in Megan's trunk bore not only her hair, but faint traces of blood as well as fingerprints. Partial, degraded, but enough to compare. Thomas Greer's prints were not on the tape, but another set matched a previous minor offender from Wyoming's state fingerprint database, a man named Shane Tolliver, whose record included trespassing, impersonating a contractor, and illegal possession of surveillance equipment. His last known address had been just outside Rock Springs. He had no known connection to Megan Kessler Falcon Ridge Construction or Thomas Greer, but Tolliver had once owned a black 1999 Chevrolet Suburban. When investigators dug deeper, they found that Tolliver had been cited in August 2005, less than 2 months before Megan's disappearance, for parking that same SUV in a restricted zone near the University of Wyoming campus. Campus police noted that Tolliver claimed he was there for contract work with facilities management. He wasn't. No such work order existed. Detectives tracked Tolliver to a rundown cabin in northwestern Montana. He'd been living off-grid for several years, collecting disability payments and making cash through unofficial handyman gigs. When agents arrived, he didn't run. He barely spoke. Inside his trailer, they found a stack of old VHS tapes, several cameras, and in a dusty shoebox, a faded student directory from the University of Wyoming, dated 2004-2005. Megan's name was highlighted. Suddenly, the pieces shifted. Tolliver had been stalking her. Her name appeared on a scribbled list alongside 8 others, all women in their late teens or early 20s, all students from Wyoming or Colorado schools. None had ever reported anything unusual. None had ever been linked to Megan until now. The theory crystallized. Tolliver had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. He followed her on the night of October 2nd, waited for her to stop for gas, and then approached when she was most vulnerable. Greer had seen this happen, maybe from his truck, maybe up close. That's when the stories likely diverged. Tolliver abducted her, or attempted to. Greer intervened or inserted himself into the situation. Either way, Megan ended up in Greer's custody, conscious or unconscious, and Tolliver vanished into the dark. The case that once seemed so simple, a missing girl buried in cement by a guilty man, was now a murky sequence of horror and hesitation. When Harmon and his team confronted Greer with Tolliver's name, his face drained of color. "I didn't know his name," he whispered. "But I saw him that night. Saw him watching her. You didn't think to tell us before. You would have just blamed me. You poured concrete over her body, Greer." Greer leaned forward, eyes glassy. "I was scared. I didn't kill her, but I didn't help her either." That was the truth Greer had been circling since his arrest. Not a lie, but a deep, paralyzing guilt. He hadn't abducted Megan. But once she was unconscious, possibly drugged or already dead, he'd chosen not to call the police. Instead, he'd chosen concealment, self-preservation, cowardice. And that cowardice had robbed Megan's family of 17 years of peace. But the bigger revelation was Tolliver. As evidence mounted, detectives found that Tolliver had briefly worked for a cement company in 2005 mixing batches for subcontractors across Wyoming. His job would have given him access to supply lists, contractor names, and job site locations, including Falcon Ridge. It was possible he knew of Greer or had crossed paths with him professionally. But nothing solid connected them until investigators uncovered a third hidden player. A burner phone found in Tolliver's trailer still held some stored data. Among the messages was a single cryptic thread dated October 3, 2005. Undelivered MSG handled. Car's yours. No plates. The number was untraceable, likely discarded years ago, but the context was unmistakable. Tolliver had been in contact with someone else. Not Greer, not DeLuna. Someone who coordinated the disappearance or covered it up. A new theory formed. Megan had been followed, targeted. Tolliver approached her, drugged or attacked her. Greer intervened not to save her, but to exploit the situation. Or perhaps he panicked, believing Megan had died from the attack. In the end, he took the car and buried it, maybe thinking that was the end of the story. But there had been more people involved. When Tolliver was questioned again, this time at length, he barely spoke. He denied knowing Megan, denied the duct tape, denied the phone. But investigators noted his hand trembled each time the name Greer was said. In a final search of Tolliver's trailer beneath warped floorboards, agents found a locked metal cash box. Inside was a stack of $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band and a folded map. The map showed a red-marked route from Fort Collins to Laramie, and a circle around the same rural gas station where Megan had stopped. On the back of the map, a list of first names, times, and dates, all from September 2005. Megan's name was at the bottom, circled twice. Tolliver had stalked her. He'd planned something. What began as a missing persons case had grown into something more sinister. The intersection of a predator, a coward, and a victim trying to get home. But for the Kesslers, answers still remained out of reach. They had a man in jail who admitted to burying their daughter. They had another man in custody who likely assaulted her. But no one could say with certainty what happened in the critical hours between 12:10 a.m. and dawn. What Megan experienced, whether she was conscious, whether she fought. The only witness left was Megan herself, and she'd been sealed in cement. The confession came unexpectedly, and not from the man they anticipated. Thomas Greer had been sitting in county jail for 4 weeks when he requested to speak with Sheriff Harmon alone. No lawyers, no reporters, no FBI agents, just the sheriff. They met in a small, windowless interview room at the Albany County Jail. Greer looked smaller somehow, his bulk hollowed by weight loss, his hands visibly shaking as he was uncuffed and seated across from Harmon. "I've had dreams," he said, eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the table. "I keep seeing her face. Not when she was scared, just after. After everything stopped." "Tell me what you mean," Harmon said gently. Greer drew in a ragged breath. "I lied about some things." Harmon remained silent, letting the pause stretch. "She wasn't dead," Greer whispered. "When I poured the cement, she was breathing." The words sucked the air out of the room. Harmon leaned forward slowly. "You knew she was alive." Greer nodded, but tears slipped down his cheeks before he could speak again. "She was unconscious. I don't know from what. Maybe that creep Tolliver drugged her. Maybe she hit her head. But I checked. She was breathing. Shallow but steady. And you buried her anyway." "I didn't know what else to do," Greer said, voice cracking. "I thought she was going to wake up and name me. Thought if she died, they'd think I killed her. I was already involved. I just wanted it to go away. Harmon couldn't speak. His mouth had gone dry. Greer went on, barely audible. It was dark. The warehouse lot was quiet. I backed the car into the slab frame, poured right over it. It took less than an hour. "You brought the cement?" "Yeah, from my own mixer. I had bags left over from another job. Just enough." The image was unbearable. Megan unconscious, sealed into a coffin of wet concrete, as Greer, fully aware of what he was doing, erased her from the world one shovel at a time. "Why keep the tape?" Harmon asked, bitter acid in his throat. "I don't know," Greer whispered. "Guilt, control, proof. Sometimes I'd watch it to remind myself she was real." They charged Greer with second-degree murder. The confession combined with the forensic evidence. The sedatives, the duct tape, the airbag, the unturned ignition confirmed a timeline of deliberate burial while the victim was still alive. Though Greer didn't inflict the initial harm, he had made the fatal decision. But the question remained, what role had Shane Tolliver played? And who was the third man behind the burner phone? That answer came from an unlikely place, a retired state highway patrol officer named Jim Delaney. Now living in Arizona, Delaney had been following the case in the news. He reached out to Harmon after reading about Tolliver. "I pulled him over once," Delaney said over the phone. "Late September 2005, just outside Rawlins. He had no plates. Said he was heading to a job site in Cheyenne. Did you ticket him?" "I should have. But then he handed me this laminated card, said he was with a private contractor working on state-funded surveillance work. Sounded official. I let him go." "What kind of surveillance work?" "Didn't say. Just that he had clearance." "Do you remember the name of the contractor?" Delaney paused. "Yeah. Something with security in it. Midwest. Mountain State." That was the thread Harmon needed. A background check of Tolliver's employment history turned up a single unregistered payroll hit in 2005. A cash gig with a now-defunct company called Mountain State Security Consultants, which had briefly operated in Colorado and Wyoming that year before folding. The company's owner, Mitchell Lang, the former private investigator. Suddenly the pattern sharpened. Lang hadn't just lost track of Megan after being hired by the Kesslers, he'd known she was gone. His company had employed Tolliver. He had ties to surveillance. And he'd allegedly been contacted by Greer after the fact. Too many coincidences and not enough alibis. Investigators obtained a second warrant, this time for Lang's property. Inside a floor safe beneath his trailer, they found a cache of old case files, burner phones, and an unregistered revolver. One file had Megan's name printed on the tab. Inside were grainy photographs clearly taken without her knowledge, showing her walking on campus, sitting outside her dorm, even filling up her car, at a gas station weeks before she vanished. Lang had been stalking her. Whether for Tolliver or someone else remained unclear. But he had kept the photos, hidden them. Even as he told Megan's parents he had nothing to report. When brought in for questioning, Lang was unrepentant. "I wasn't the one who buried her," he said. "But I knew she wasn't coming back." "Why?" Megan, Harmon asked. Lang stared at the ceiling. "She wasn't special. She was just easy to watch." It wasn't the answer anyone wanted, but it was the truth. Lang had watched her. Tolliver had followed her. Greer had buried her. 3 men, 3 different degrees of evil, but all responsible. Lang was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Tolliver faced charges of unlawful restraint and aggravated stalking. Greer, now the centerpiece of the trial, was charged with second-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and destruction of evidence. At Megan's funeral, held 17 years after her disappearance, over 200 people gathered at the University of Wyoming chapel. Her parents sat in the front pew, their faces lined with both grief and relief. A portrait of Megan in her freshman year smiled from a small easel near the altar. Tyler Kessler delivered the eulogy. She was kind. She was smart. She wanted to help kids, to heal people. She didn't deserve what happened to her. But now we know. Now we bring her home. The community, once too silent, stood to their feet in collective mourning. They'd buried her once. Now they could finally remember her. 17 years after Megan Kessler vanished into the Wyoming night, the trial of Thomas Greer began under heavy media scrutiny in the Laramie County Courthouse. Reporters from across the country packed the pews, flanked by members of Megan's family and friends from her college years. Many now grown married with children Megan would never meet. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. They presented the video footage, the missing tape Greer had secretly kept, the unsent text message recovered from Megan's phone, the forensic evidence of duct tape bearing Megan's hair blood and Tolliver's prints, the permit forged by Greer. And finally, Greer's own confession: he buried a breathing woman in a concrete tomb out of fear and cowardice. Suka. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as the audio recording of Greer's jailhouse admission played over the sound system. His voice was fragile, unguarded, more ghost than man. I didn't kill her with a knife. I didn't shoot her. But I buried her. I knew she was alive. And I poured the cement anyway. The jury didn't deliberate long. After just 6 hours, they returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. Greer showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to 40 years to life with no possibility of parole before 30. He was led away in cuffs, his eyes flickering once, only once, toward the gallery where Diane and Warren Kessler sat holding hands. Diane didn't look at him. Tolliver and Lang were tried separately. Tolliver pleaded guilty to unlawful restraint and received 18 years. Lang, faced with overwhelming evidence of stalking, obstruction, and conspiracy, entered an Alford plea acknowledging the state's case without admitting guilt, and was sentenced to 15 years. For the Kesslers, the end of the trials brought a strange, unsteady peace. They returned to Casper with Megan's ashes in a polished wooden urn engraved with the words, "Loved, remembered, found." Warren built a small garden in their backyard, just beneath the cottonwood tree Megan had once climbed as a child. He installed a bench facing east. On quiet mornings, he'd sit there with a mug of coffee and stare at the horizon, thinking about the drive she never finished. Diane began speaking at schools, universities, and women's advocacy groups, sharing Megan's story not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to persistence, truth, and love that refused to die. Tyler established a nonprofit foundation in his sister's name, the Megan Kessler Project, focused on supporting families of the missing and funding technology that recovers long-dormant digital evidence like cell phone data and outdated security footage. In its first year, the foundation helped solve 3 cold cases. But for all their healing, there was no erasing what had been lost. Sometimes Diane would sit with Megan's favorite book in her lap, To Kill a Mockingbird, and imagine her daughter in scrubs, walking hospital corridors, helping children breathe easier. Megan had dreamed of becoming a pediatrician. She would have graduated in 2008. In Laramie, the gas station where it all began was torn down. A small memorial plaque was installed where Pump 2 once stood. Students left flowers there each October. The town changed, but the echo of Megan's name remained. Even years later, people spoke of the case with a hushed reverence, how the answers had been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath concrete, and sealed in silence. How 3 men had carried different pieces of the truth, and how a family's quiet refusal to forget had cracked open the earth. In the final pages of the case file, Sheriff Harmon, now nearing retirement, wrote a note to future investigators. Not every case ends with justice. Not every mystery gets a clean resolution. But never let the silence fool you. Beneath it, there is always a voice waiting to be heard. Megan's voice led us here. Don't stop listening. And somewhere in the high Wyoming wind that skates across empty highways and forgotten rest stops, her voice lingers still.